Chapter 1: Echoes of a Privileged Upbringing. Samuel Sinclair entered the world cradled in the deceptive embrace of a seemingly perfect family. Their lives unfolded within the walls of a grand mansion, punctuated by the sleek lines of luxury cars and the glittering spectacle of lavish parties. Guests from the highest echelons of society graced their home, yet behind the imposing oak doors, a chilling emptiness reigned, punctuated by the incessant discord of bitter arguments. Richard Sinclair, Samuel's father, was a formidable figure, a ruthless titan in the corporate jungle. This ruthlessness extended into his personal life, particularly his relationship with Samuel's mother, Evelyn. He believed he loved her, or perhaps he simply craved possession. His affection was not the tender, nurturing love that fueled dreams. Instead, it was a suffocating force, demanding absolute control, allowing only him to thrive while slowly extinguishing her spirit. Samuel's childhood memories were haunted by the echoes of those tumultuous nights. He would cower behind the grand staircase, his young eyes wide with fear, absorbing the venomous exchanges between his parents. Evelyn, once a vibrant and radiant woman, gradually transformed into a shadow of her former self, her joy replaced by a quiet melancholy. Her smiles never reached her eyes, and when silence descended upon her, it seemed to freeze the entire house in its grip. He vividly recalled an incident when he was around 8 years old. His mother, desperate for escape, had clutched him tightly, whispering promises of a new life, far away from their gilded cage, where she could finally live free from his father's control. But their escape was thwarted. Richard discovered their plans. Samuel could still picture his mother kneeling on the cold marble floor, tears streaming down her face, as his father stood over her, his voice calm but laced with an iron authority. "Did you really think you could leave me, Evelyn?" he had asked. That was the end of her attempts at freedom. From that moment on, Samuel understood that love was not the beautiful fairy tale depicted in stories. It was a cage, and once trapped within, escape was impossible. As the years passed, these bitter lessons became etched into Samuel's very being. He grew into a man with two unwavering convictions. He would never love anyone, and he would never bring a child into this world. He refused to perpetuate the toxic cycle of his parents. He would not inflict control and possessiveness on another, nor would he subject his own child to the kind of childhood he had endured. Driven by his keen intelligence, unwavering determination, and the same ruthless nature he had inherited from his father, Samuel built a financial empire. He became one of the world's youngest billionaires, his leadership transforming Sinclair Financial Group into a dominant force across numerous markets, orchestrating multi-billion-dollar deals with unparalleled precision and power. Yet, despite his immense wealth and influence, Samuel remained aloof and emotionally distant. He cultivated no friendships, showed no interest in frivolous social gatherings, and allowed no one to penetrate the walls he had erected around his heart. To his employees, he was the epitome of a perfect CEO, yet no one dared to cross the invisible line of professional distance. To his rivals, he was a formidable adversary, a nightmare who never faltered. To women, he was nothing more than a wealthy but emotionally unavailable man. Samuel was convinced he could navigate life on his own terms, until Amelia entered his carefully constructed world. Chapter 2: A Twist of Fate's Design. Amelia Hart was a woman who thrived on warmth, connection, and genuine relationships. She could never have imagined her life intertwining with a man as seemingly cold and detached as Samuel Sinclair. Fate, however, has a way of defying expectations, and their paths collided in the most unexpected manner. As one of New York's most sought-after event planners, Amelia was accustomed to orchestrating extravagant parties for the city's elite. She had worked with prominent politicians, celebrated movie stars, and powerful billionaires, yet none had left as indelible a mark on her as Samuel Sinclair. Sinclair Financial Group was hosting a prestigious charity gala to benefit underprivileged children, one of the most significant events of the year for the company. Amelia was entrusted with its organization. She had heard whispers about Samuel, a CEO who shunned the limelight, never appearing in tabloids with romantic scandals, a man who kept the world at arm's length. Yet, meeting him in person was still a revelation. His aura of cold detachment was palpable in every gesture, every glance. He stood amidst the crowded room, yet seemed utterly separate from it, an untouchable figure. Few dared to approach him unless absolutely necessary. But Amelia was not easily intimidated by power or distance. She approached Samuel with professionalism and ease, treating him as she would any other guest. "Mr. Sinclair, I hope you're satisfied with tonight's event." Samuel turned his head, his sharp gaze lingering on her face for a fleeting moment before he offered a curt nod. "I have no complaints." No words of praise, but for Samuel, that was already a rare acknowledgement. Amelia simply smiled. "Then I'm relieved." Samuel raised an eyebrow, intrigued. This woman was different. She wasn't flustered by his presence, nor was she attempting to flatter him or vie for his attention. She spoke to him with a natural ease that disarmed him. Amelia was perhaps the only person who could comfortably converse with Samuel. The gala was a resounding success, but such grand events invariably led to after-parties. Samuel typically avoided such gatherings, but for some inexplicable reason, he lingered that night. Perhaps it was Amelia's presence that held him captive. As the event wound down, Samuel remained at the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He rarely indulged in alcohol, but tonight he allowed himself a small exception. And somehow Amelia found her way to his side. "Mr. Sinclair, it seems like it's been a long day," Amelia remarked, ordering a glass of wine for herself. Samuel looked at her, and for the first time that night, a faint smile played on his lips. "You don't have to call me Mr. Samuel is fine." Amelia was slightly surprised, but quickly returned his smile. "All right then, Samuel." They sat there, sipping their drinks and engaging in conversation, their interactions resembling those of old friends. There were no intrusive questions, no unnecessary probing into his personal life. Amelia made no attempt to delve into his world, and that put him at ease. And somehow, when they had both consumed just enough to loosen their inhibitions, Samuel leaned in toward Amelia, and she did not recoil. It began as a fleeting kiss, but as their breaths mingled and Samuel felt the softness of her lips and the warmth of her presence, the carefully constructed barriers between them shattered. They left the party together, and that night, for the first time in his life, Samuel relinquished his grip on the future. He didn't care what tomorrow would bring. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains as Samuel awoke in his own apartment, with Amelia still sleeping peacefully beside him. He was unaccustomed to this feeling. Usually, after a night with a woman, she would expect something, a follow-up date, a veiled promise, and that was why he always ended things abruptly. But Amelia was different. She woke up, stretched languidly, and then turned to him with a light-hearted smile. "Good morning, Samuel." No expectations, no demands. For some reason, that made him feel unburdened. And so, their connection deepened. They dined together, watched movies, shared stories about their lives, their interactions resembling those of close friends. But on certain nights, they also sought each other out, finding comfort in shared warmth, tender kisses, and quiet embraces. Welcome to Soul Stories. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 3. An Unspoken Bond. Amelia couldn't pinpoint the exact moment her relationship with Samuel had evolved into its current form. There were no promises, no official titles, yet they remained intertwined in a strange, unspoken way. She wasn't the first woman to share a night with Samuel, but she was the only one who could sit across from him the next morning without being dismissed. They shared breakfast, watched movies on quiet weekend nights, and spent countless afternoons chatting about everything and nothing. It all felt so natural, so effortless, and yet, that very ease was what caused Amelia the most heartache. Samuel maintained a distance from the world. He had no true friends, no family he was genuinely close to. To everyone else, Samuel Sinclair was the epitome of a cold, unapproachable billionaire. A sharp businessman so detached he seemed almost devoid of emotion. But with Amelia he was different. She had witnessed those rare moments when exhaustion flickered across his face, when he unconsciously reached for her hand without realizing it, when he silently observed her on nights when neither of them spoke. She knew Samuel didn't believe in love, but Amelia loved him anyway, despite everything. She didn't expect a declaration of affection, nor did she harbor hopes for promises of a future together. She only wished that one day, Samuel would realize he didn't have to run from love, that he didn't have to push her away. But Samuel was not what she wished for. Amelia loved children. She loved holding them, witnessing their innocent smiles, listening to their tiny voices, learning to speak their language of wonder. Ever since she was a little girl, she had dreamed of having a small family, where she could shower her children with all the love she possessed. But Samuel was different. One evening, as they sat on the couch, engrossed in a movie, Amelia absent-mindedly asked, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" The seemingly harmless question caused Samuel to immediately tense up. He didn't turn to look at her, but Amelia could feel the rigidity in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around his glass of whiskey. After a long pause he spoke, his voice low and firm. "No." Amelia frowned slightly, pressing gently. "You don't like children? That's not it." Samuel exhaled sharply, setting his glass down. "I just have no intention of having kids. Ever." The finality in his tone caused Amelia to falter. She had once hoped that perhaps Samuel simply hadn't considered the possibility, but now it was clear that he hadn't just not considered it. He had already made a definitive decision. She forced a smile, concealing the weight that settled in her chest. "Why?" Samuel was silent for a long time. Then he simply said, "I don't want to be like my father." His words squeezed her heart. She had heard Samuel mention his father once before, a powerful, wealthy man who controlled his mother to the point where she had no freedom, no real life of her own. Samuel had grown up in a home where love was not care but possession, and perhaps that was why he feared that if he ever had children, he would become that kind of father. Amelia knew Samuel wouldn't change overnight. She didn't blame him for his past wounds, nor for his inability to love her the way she wanted. But sometimes, she wondered if she was leading herself down a road with no escape. She loved him, but Samuel could never give her what she longed for most. A family, a child, a complete life. Every time she looked at him, she felt like she was holding a handful of sand. If she let go, or if she held on too tightly, it would slip away just the same. But if she continued like this, how long could she endure? She didn't want to force Samuel, didn't want to pressure him, but her love for him wasn't enough to change the truth. They wanted different things in life. Samuel didn't believe in love, and Amelia couldn't stop loving him. Chapter 4. The Dawn of a New Life. Amelia stared at the pregnancy test in her hand, her heartbeat a frantic drum against her ribs. 2 red lines blazed before her eyes. She was pregnant. She should have been terrified. An unplanned pregnancy, without a partner to share the joy and fears, should have filled her with anxiety. But it didn't. A smile bloomed on Amelia's lips. For as long as she could remember, she had yearned for a child. A tiny life to love and nurture, to build a real family filled with love, not the invisible chains and fear that had defined Samuel's upbringing. And now that dream had materialized. She gently placed a hand over her abdomen, where a small life was beginning to form. The mere thought of it was enough to flood her heart with warmth and happiness. But then Samuel came to mind. She recalled the moments they had shared, the times she had cautiously broached the topic of children. Each time his response was the same, firm and unwavering. "I don't want kids. Never. I don't want to be like my father." Samuel didn't hate children. She knew that. But he was haunted by his own childhood, by the fear of possession, by the pain that love could inflict. And because of that, he never wanted to be a father. She knew that if she told him, he wouldn't be happy. He might even look at her with that cold, distant gaze. She knew how much he despised obligations. Samuel was not an irresponsible man, but Amelia didn't want her child to grow up with a father who saw them as a burden. She didn't want to see Samuel's empty eyes as he forced himself to accept something he had never wanted. And most of all, she couldn't bear the thought of her child growing up without genuine love from their father. For days, Amelia wrestled with the decision of whether or not to tell Samuel. She desperately wanted to believe that upon hearing the news, he would change, that he would realize having a child wasn't a burden but a miracle. But that was just a hopeful fantasy. Reality was different. She knew Samuel wasn't the kind of man who could easily change his mind. He didn't believe in love, he didn't want a family, and most importantly, he didn't want children. So, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't force Samuel to be a father if he wasn't ready. Just as she couldn't remain beside a man who could never give her what she truly desired. No matter how deeply she loved Samuel, Amelia knew she could no longer prioritize her own desires. She now carried another life within her. A child she needed to protect and love above all else. She couldn't allow her baby to grow up in an environment of coldness and indifference. She had to leave. She would channel all the love she had for Samuel and pour it into this tiny life growing inside her. She decided to sever ties with this fragile, unrequited love. Once her decision was made, Amelia began her preparations. She resigned from her job, packed her belongings, and began searching for a new city to call home. She chose a place far away, a place where no one knew her, where no one knew about her relationship with Samuel Sinclair, a place where she could live a peaceful life with her child, free from the shadows of the past. On the day she left, she stood in front of her apartment one last time, silently absorbing all the memories she and Samuel had created there. She didn't write a goodbye letter. She didn't leave behind any trace, because Amelia knew that if Samuel truly wanted to find her, he would. But if he didn't, then perhaps that would be the clearest answer about their love. And she would not regret her decision, because from this moment on, it was no longer about Samuel. It was about her and her child. What about you? If you were Amelia, would you leave or stay and tell Samuel the truth? Chapter 5. The Emptiness Within. Samuel Sinclair was never one for romantic inclinations. He didn't subscribe to the notion of love, nor did he believe in the longevity of relationships. So, when Amelia vanished from his life, he didn't give it much thought. Perhaps she was simply upset, frustrated about something, or immersed in a demanding new project. He figured she would return in a few days, a few weeks, just as she always had. Hadn't they always operated under an unspoken agreement? No commitments, no labels, no promises, no love? So, her disappearance shouldn't have come as a surprise. Or at least, that was what Samuel kept telling himself. But time marched on. 1 month, 2 months, and Amelia remained absent. He called her, but she didn't answer. He went to her former workplace, only to learn that she had resigned and moved away, her destination unknown. That was when the truth hit him. She was truly gone. A strange sense of loss settled in his chest, an emptiness he couldn't quite articulate. But still, he carried on as usual. He buried himself in his work, immersing himself in numbers and billion-dollar deals, expanding his empire, anything to distract himself from the emptiness gnawing at his insides. Chapter 6. An Unexpected Revelation. 5 years had passed, a span long enough to transform a person. But for Samuel, some things remained immutable. He was still the same cold, rational man, still entrenched in his work. Yet, no matter how demanding his schedule, when the silence of his penthouse descended each night, Amelia's face would inevitably resurface in his mind. Until today, Samuel had never imagined he would set foot in a small town like this. It was hardly a haven for financial titans like himself. Yet, he was here on business to acquire a promising startup his company had been eyeing. After a lengthy meeting, his assistant suggested a quick stop at a quaint cafe on the corner of the street. Samuel was indifferent. Cafe was just a cafe. But the moment he stepped inside, his world froze. His grip on his coffee cup tightened, his heart pounding against his ribs. There, bathed in the soft afternoon sunlight by the window, sat a familiar figure. Amelia. 5 years had passed, But she was the same gentle eyes, the same smile he once knew so well. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, a little boy, around 4 years old, was chattering happily, his eyes sparkling with joy. Samuel struggled to breathe. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. That child looked exactly like him. In that instant, everything shattered. Amelia had been pregnant, and she had left to raise their child alone. A sharp pain pierced Samuel's chest. Memories flooded back. The times Amelia had spoken about wanting a family, about having children. He had dismissed her words, thinking they had nothing to do with him. The time she had asked him about having kids, and he had coldly shut down the conversation. The silent, unreadable way she had looked at him, as if she was holding back something he never understood. The moment she had left without a word, without an explanation. Back then, he hadn't understood why she had disappeared without a trace. Now he did. She hadn't wanted him to know, hadn't wanted him to feel obligated, hadn't wanted their child to grow up with a father who never wanted them. A surge of anger coursed through him, or not anger at Amelia, but anger at himself. It was his own indifference, his own cruelty that had pushed her away. He had made her believe that he didn't want the baby, and now he had lost 5 years of his son's life. 5 years he could never reclaim. Samuel clenched his fists, his eyes darkening. He couldn't wait another second. He stood up abruptly and strode toward Amelia's table. But just as he was a few steps away, a tall, well-dressed man suddenly stepped in front of him, approaching Amelia. His deep, steady voice rang out, "Amelia, have you been waiting long?" Samuel froze. The man looked at the child and smiled warmly, reaching down to gently ruffle his hair. "Son, have you been waiting for Daddy?" The air crackled with tension. Samuel's entire body went rigid. He looked at Amelia, then at the child, then at the stranger who had just called his son Daddy. A cold chill snaked down his spine. His chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. Had she moved on? Was this why she had disappeared? Samuel couldn't believe what he was seeing. For the first time in his life, he felt completely out of control. Everything he thought he understood, everything he believed he could reclaim, was slipping away before his very eyes. Chapter 7. The Depth of the Deception. Samuel stood frozen, his world shattered. That stranger had just referred to the boy as his son. His chest constricted, making it nearly impossible to draw breath. Why? Why was this unfolding before him? He had always convinced himself that his relationship with Amelia was nothing more than a fleeting affair, an arrangement where both parties were equal, free to come and go as they pleased, no commitments, no expectations, no constraints, and certainly no love. A woman had briefly graced his life and then departed without any lingering obligations or lingering ties. But now, witnessing her alongside another man, hearing that man address the child who bore his very features as his son, a profound sense of heartbreak washed over Samuel for the first time in his life. It was a raw, piercing ache, and he realized that Amelia had selflessly dedicated years of her youth to him without demanding any recognition, without any assurances, solely fueled by her genuine affection. She had never sought material wealth, societal status, or even a reciprocation of her feelings. She had simply been there, unwavering in her support, and he had taken it for granted. So much so that when she vanished from his life, all he registered was a vague sense of emptiness, a void he never truly confronted. He had missed her, had acknowledged a sense of incompleteness in her absence, but it had never inflicted this kind of pain. Now, witnessing her happiness with another man, witnessing the dissipation of the hope he hadn't even realized he harbored, his heart ached in a way he had never known before. Everything he had held to be true about love, about family, crumbled into dust. He had always perceived love as a chain, a stifling constraint reminiscent of the one his father had imposed upon his mother. He had believed that family was nothing more than a forced connection between two individuals destined to ultimately inflict pain upon each other. He had dedicated his entire life to evading these very things, and yet now, as he gazed upon Amelia, the woman who had once loved him so unconditionally, now smiling at another man, as he looked at the little boy with his own eyes calling someone else Dad, Samuel came to the crushing realization that he had been wrong. Terribly, irrevocably wrong. He was oblivious to the struggles Amelia had endured over the past 5 years, ignorant of the loneliness she must have experienced raising their child on her own. He didn't know how long she had waited for him before surrendering hope and finally moving on. She had found happiness with someone else. That truth pierced Samuel like a blade, because deep down, he knew that the man who should have been standing by her side, the man who should have been hers, was him. The man who should have been that child's father was him. But he had squandered it all. He had pushed Amelia away. Chapter 8. Exposing Buried Secrets. Samuel received the confidential investigation report just hours later, his hands trembling as he opened the file. The words swam before his eyes. Amelia Hart, 29 years old. 5 years ago, she relocated to this city. She resides with her son, Oliver Hart, was currently 4 years old. Samuel's chest tightened. 5 years ago. That meant she'd left him and come here almost immediately after their last encounter. He didn't need a DNA test to confirm what he already knew deep down. The boy was his. But what truly seized Samuel's attention was the information about the man beside her. Daniel Whitmore, 34 years old, chief executive officer of a major tech company, and someone who had been pursuing Amelia for the past 5 years. The last sentence sent a jolt of electricity through Samuel's system. For 5 years, this man had been at her side. But they weren't married. A flicker of hope, small but persistent, ignited in Samuel's chest. If Amelia truly loved Daniel, wouldn't they have married by now? The fact that she hadn't suggested she didn't entirely belong to Daniel. That meant Samuel still had a chance, however slim. Without hesitation, he got into his car, the engine roaring to life, and drove straight to Amelia's house. It was a small, unassuming home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. As his car pulled up in front of the wrought iron gate, he sat there for a long moment, staring at the modest but warm-looking house. It spoke of a peaceful life, a life built brick by brick, a life without him. Taking a deep breath, steeling his resolve, he stepped out of the car and walked towards the front door. The moment he rang the doorbell, the door swung open. Amelia stood there, her eyes widening in surprise, as if she couldn't quite believe he was really standing in front of her, solid and real. For years had etched subtle lines around her eyes, but she was just as beautiful as ever. The same captivating eyes, the same gentle smile, a smile he had taken for granted. A smile that now, achingly, no longer belonged to him. Before Samuel could utter a single word, a warm, deep voice resonated from inside the house. "Oliver, well done, buddy. Come here." Samuel froze, his gaze flicking past Amelia, towards the living room. There, sitting on the floor amidst scattered toys, was Daniel. Calm, composed, and smiling, as he played with a small boy. A boy with jet-black hair and bright, intelligent eyes that were undeniably his. Samuel's chest constricted. He stood rooted to the spot, watching as Daniel ruffled Oliver's hair affectionately. Oliver laughed, a pure, innocent sound, wrapping his tiny arms around Daniel's neck. His voice was light, carefree, and brimming with joy. "Daddy, look what I can do. Daddy." It felt like someone had driven a knife straight into Samuel's heart, twisting it with cruel precision. Amelia glanced at Samuel's expression, a flicker of sadness in her eyes, but remained silent. For a long moment, the air between the three of them grew heavy, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, Daniel stood up, brushing off his pants. He looked at Samuel for a brief moment, his expression unreadable, before offering a polite nod. "Hello, I'm Daniel." His voice was calm, almost disarmingly so. There was no hostility, no challenge, just a quiet acknowledgement. Samuel clenched his fists at his sides, forcing himself to remain composed. Tension crackled in the air, though both men maintained a civil front. Daniel glanced at Amelia, a silent communication passing between them, before speaking gently. "I'll be heading out now. Oliver, be good. All right?" "Yes." Oliver beamed, his bright eyes following Daniel as he turned to leave. Just before walking out the door, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Amelia's shoulder, offering her a small, understanding smile. As the door closed behind him, the room suddenly felt suffocating, the silence amplifying every unspoken thought. Samuel remained standing there, his eyes locked onto Amelia. She led Oliver into his room, the sound of childish chatter drifting back, then turned back to face him. "That boy!" His voice was slow, deliberate, each word carefully chosen. "He's my son, isn't he?" Amelia let out a quiet sigh, a sound heavy with resignation. She didn't want to hide anymore. She couldn't hide anymore. "Yes." Samuel felt his entire world tilt on its axis, threatening to send him spiraling into the abyss. 5 years. For 5 long years, he had lived in blissful ignorance, never knowing he had a child. A son who carried his blood, his genes, his legacy. His jaw clenched as he forced out the words, each syllable laced with raw emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" His sharp gaze was filled with something unfamiliar, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Pain. Amelia's fingers curled into fists, her knuckles white, but she did not look away. "Samuel, do you really want to ask me that?" Her voice was calm, almost eerily so, but firm. "Do you remember what you used to say to me? That you didn't want kids? That you were afraid of love? That you feared commitment? If I had told you I was pregnant back then, how do you think you would have reacted?" Samuel couldn't answer because she was right. Back then, he would have panicked. He would have felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of responsibility. But that didn't mean she had the right to take away his chance to be a father. No matter what his past self might have thought, he deserved to know. "He's still my son. You shouldn't have made that decision alone." His voice dropped lower, restrained but firm. Amelia let out a bitter chuckle, devoid of humor. "I didn't make the decision alone. I made it for both of us. I didn't want my child to grow up with a father who only stayed out of obligation, a father who resented his existence. If you had truly wanted a child, you would have realized it sooner. But you never looked for me in the past 5 years, did you?" Samuel went still, the air knocked out of him as her words hit their mark. How could he argue with that? Because she was right again. He had never searched for her. He had always assumed she was just another woman passing through his life, a fleeting infatuation. He expected she would eventually return, as she always had, drawn back by the invisible threads of their connection. But she hadn't. She had moved on, built a life, and he hadn't even noticed. Samuel took a deep breath, the tension slowly bleeding out of him, his gaze softening for the first time, laced with regret. "Amelia," he said slowly, the weight of his words settling in the air. "I'm sorry." Amelia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had once longed to hear those words, had dreamt of the day he would finally acknowledge his mistakes. But now that she had, they felt hollow, almost meaningless. "There's no need to apologize, Samuel." She gave him a faint, tired smile. "I was never angry at you. I came into your life willingly, knowing full well that you didn't believe in love, that you didn't want a family. At first, I thought if I loved you enough, you might change. But when I found out I was pregnant, I realized I couldn't keep chasing after something that was never meant to be." She exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting towards the window, where Oliver was happily playing with his toys, oblivious to the turmoil swirling within the room. "When I left, I stopped giving my love to you. I gave it all to our son." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the faint sounds of Oliver's laughter. Samuel felt as if he had lost something irreplaceable, something he hadn't even known he possessed. It wasn't just that Amelia no longer loved him, but that she had learned to live without him, had built a world where he didn't exist, a world where their son thrived. Amelia stared at Samuel, her breath slightly unsteady. "You want to meet him?" It wasn't a question, but could she really allow that to happen? For 4 years, she had raised Oliver alone, protecting him from any potential pain, shielding him from the heartbreak of being rejected by his own father. She never wanted him to grow up feeling unwanted, feeling like he wasn't enough. And now, Samuel had suddenly reappeared, demanding to see his son, disrupting the carefully constructed peace she had fought so hard to maintain. "Samuel, my son doesn't need you." Her voice was calm, but firm, each word a carefully placed shield. Her words only made Samuel's gaze darken, a flicker of defiance igniting within his eyes. "That was your decision, Amelia, not his." His voice was low, but sharp, cutting through her defenses. "Have you ever considered that Oliver has the right to know his father?" She bit her lip, the internal battle raging within her. Yes, Oliver did have that right, but she was afraid. Afraid that Samuel would only be here for a moment, a fleeting presence in their lives, only to leave again once he realized he wasn't ready to be a father, once the novelty wore off. "Do you really think you can be a good father?" She let out a bitter laugh, the sound laced with doubt. "You don't even believe in love. You once told me you never wanted children. And now what? You've suddenly changed your mind?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. He knew Amelia had every right to be angry, every right to question his motives. She had gone through pregnancy alone, given birth alone, raised their son alone for 4 long years. All because of the careless words and selfish decisions he had made in the past. He had never imagined himself as a father, had actively pushed the idea away. But when he had seen Oliver in that cafe, seen his own son running into another man's arms and calling him dad, it had crushed him with a force he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. Samuel clenched his fists, his voice low but unwavering. "I don't know if I can be a good father." He was honest, laying bare his insecurities. "But I do know one thing. I won't let my son grow up not knowing who his real father is." Amelia's grip tightened, her heart warring with itself. Because deep down, despite all her fears, she knew Oliver had the right to know his father, to understand where he came from. Chapter 10. The First Meeting. After a long moment of agonizing hesitation, Amelia finally agreed to let Samuel meet Oliver. But with one condition. Her voice was cold, her gaze sharp. "You will not hurt him. If you think you can just meet him and then disappear the moment you feel unsure, then don't meet him at all." Samuel gave a firm nod, his resolve unwavering. He would not leave. Not this time. They agreed to meet the next afternoon at a park near Amelia's home. Samuel arrived early, pacing nervously, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had closed billion-dollar deals, faced some of the most ruthless businessmen in the world, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever made him as nervous as he was now. He was about to meet his son. For long years had passed, and this would be the first time he would lay eyes on the child he should have been protecting since before he was even born. Then, in the distance, he saw them. Amelia walked towards him, holding the hand of a small boy with soft brown hair. "Oliver." Samuel felt his chest tighten, his breath catching in his throat. The boy had his eyes. Amelia crouched down beside Oliver, speaking to him gently, her voice barely audible. "Oliver, this is a friend of mine. His name is Samuel." She wasn't ready to tell Oliver the truth yet, not until she was sure. She wanted to give them both time to adjust, to ease into this new reality. Oliver looked up at Samuel, his bright blue eyes filled with curiosity, assessing him with an innocent intensity. "Mr. Samuel?" the boy asked hesitantly, his voice small and sweet. For the first time in his life, Samuel didn't know what to say. He had prepared 1,000 things in his mind, rehearsed countless scenarios. But now, faced with the reality of his son, every word had vanished, leaving him speechless. "Hello, Oliver," he finally spoke, his voice softer than it had ever been, laced with a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. Oliver tilted his head, studying him intently, as if trying to decipher some hidden code. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you like superheroes?" Samuel blinked, caught completely off guard by the unexpected question. Superheroes? He had spent his entire life analyzing financial markets, outmaneuvering corporate giants, accumulating wealth and power. And yet, the very first question from his son was about superheroes. Amelia let out a soft laugh at the rare moment of confusion etched on Samuel's face, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Samuel looked at Oliver, then slowly nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his own lips. Yes, I like superheroes. Oliver's face lit up, transforming his entire demeanor. Then do you know who's the strongest? Samuel thought for a moment, considering the options before answering seriously. I think Iron Man is pretty strong. He has that awesome suit of armor and all those gadgets. Oliver frowned, his brow furrowed in disagreement. No way. Spider-Man is the strongest. Samuel raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the boy's conviction. Is that so? What makes Spider-Man so strong? Yeah. Because Spider-Man can swing on webs, run really fast, and he's super nice too, Oliver exclaimed, his voice filled with passion. Samuel watched Oliver as he spoke, his little eyes shining with excitement as he passionately defended his favorite superhero, explaining his unique powers and unwavering dedication to justice. And for the first time in his life, Samuel felt something unfamiliar settle in his heart. A warmth, a tenderness, a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. He had never imagined having something this small and full of energy in his life. A little boy pure and bright, bursting with curiosity and enthusiasm. A little boy who was his son. Samuel stared at Oliver, an overwhelming wave of emotions rising inside him. He had missed too much. Chapter 11. The Encounter at the Conference. The International Economic Conference was being held in London that year, gathering the most influential figures in finance and business from around the globe. Samuel entered the grand hall with his usual calm demeanor, his sharp gaze scanning the room like that of a seasoned wolf surveying his territory. He didn't particularly enjoy these events, finding them tedious and often superficial, but for the sake of his company, he attended nonetheless, fulfilling his obligations with a practiced efficiency. Amidst the endless discussions about investment markets, global trade, and economic forecasts, a familiar name suddenly appeared on the list of speakers, Daniel Whitmore. Samuel narrowed his eyes slightly, his interest piqued. Daniel Whitmore. That man, the one who had been by Amelia's side for 4 years, the one Oliver called Dad. Samuel's grip on his glass tightened almost imperceptibly, the crystal digging into his palm. As soon as the discussion panel ended and the attendees began to disperse, Samuel made his move, navigating the crowded room with a singular focus. It wasn't long before he spotted Daniel, engaged in a conversation with a group of colleagues. Daniel saw him too, their eyes meeting across the room. Two men, both powerful, both successful, yet bound by an invisible thread, a shared connection to Amelia and Oliver. Daniel was the first to speak, his tone composed and professional. Samuel. Samuel nodded, keeping a polite front, though a palpable tension lingered beneath his calm exterior. He knew this conversation was inevitable. Daniel studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable, then sighed, a hint of weariness in his voice. I'm guessing you want to talk about Amelia. Samuel didn't deny it. There was no point in playing games. He wanted answers, and he wanted them now. They moved to a quieter lounge in the hotel, away from the throng of attendees, where soft jazz played in the background, providing a subtle soundtrack to their unspoken rivalry. Samuel set his drink down on the polished mahogany table, his gaze locked onto the man sitting across from him. I want to know what's between you and Amelia. His voice was direct, unwavering, leaving no room for ambiguity. Daniel let out a small chuckle, shaking his head almost ruefully. It's not what you think. Samuel frowned, waiting for an explanation. He was prepared for a confrontation, for a declaration of love, for a fight. But Daniel's words suggested something else entirely. Leaning back in his chair, Daniel's expression turned distant, almost melancholic, as if recalling something from a long time ago. I met Amelia on a rainy night years ago, shortly after she arrived in town. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and nearly collapsed on the sidewalk, pregnant with Oliver. He paused, giving Samuel time to absorb the words, allowing the weight of his revelation to sink in. I took her to the hospital, made sure she was safe, and from that day on I decided to help her, to be there for her. He paused again, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I didn't stay with her to take her away from you, Samuel. I always knew her heart never belonged to me. You're the one she loves. And sadly, you never realized how much. Samuel clenched his fists under the table, the need to lash out, to deny Daniel's words, rising within him. He wanted to believe that Daniel was lying, that he had ulterior motives, that he was somehow manipulating the situation. But deep down, he knew that Daniel was telling the truth. Daniel smiled faintly, though there was something undeniably unreadable in his eyes. A hint of sadness, perhaps, or maybe just acceptance. You know, I pursued Amelia for 4 years, poured my heart out to her, tried everything I could to win her over. But not once did she let me into her heart. She always turned me down gently, but firmly, because... Daniel stopped, his gaze locking with Samuel's, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Because you were already too deeply engraved in her heart. The words struck Samuel like a blow to the chest, leaving him breathless and disoriented. He had always known Amelia loved him, had taken it for granted as a constant, unwavering truth. But he had never imagined that even after leaving him, even after building a new life without him, she had never truly let him go, that he still held a piece of her heart, a piece that he hadn't even known he possessed. Daniel continued, his tone calm but tinged with quiet bitterness. I adopted Oliver, raised him as my own, but I never tried to replace you. I was only there as a friend, as someone to protect Amelia and your son, to provide stability and support. He paused, his gaze hardening, a new intensity entering his voice. But Samuel, Daniel's expression sharpened, his voice laced with a challenge. If you truly love Amelia, if you truly want your family back, if you're finally ready to be the man she deserves. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into Samuel's. Then this time, don't hurt her again. Samuel said nothing, his mind reeling from the revelations, his emotions a tangled mess of guilt, regret, and a newfound sense of purpose. He simply sat there silent, absorbing Daniel's words, processing the weight of his responsibility. But deep inside, for the first time in a long time, he understood. He had lost the most important thing in his life once, and this time he wasn't going to lose her again. Chapter 12, Learning to Love. After his conversation with Daniel, Samuel drove straight to Amelia's house. The image of her face, etched with a mixture of hope and trepidation, fueling his determination. Night had fallen, and the warm glow from the windows cast a soft, inviting light onto the quiet street, transforming the modest house into a haven. This home had never had a place for him, but from now on he wanted to be a part of it, to help build it, to fill it with laughter and love. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve, and pressed the doorbell, the sound echoing through the silent night. The door opened, and there she was, standing before him, bathed in the soft light of the entryway. The same familiar face, the same captivating eyes, but now, instead of warmth and affection, her gaze held something different. Guardedness, a cautious reserve, a silent, invisible wall between them. Samuel, she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise, but she quickly composed herself, masking her emotions with a practiced ease. Samuel didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, looking at her for a long moment, memorizing every detail of her face, searching for a sign, a flicker of hope. Then he finally said, his voice steady yet urgent, I want a chance. Amelia frowned, her brow furrowed in confusion. A chance for what? A chance to love you, and a chance to be a father again. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions, a testament to his newfound vulnerability. Her heart trembled slightly, the long dormant embers of hope threatening to ignite within her. But she couldn't allow herself to believe him so easily. She had been hurt before, had allowed herself to dream of a future that never materialized, and she couldn't risk that again. Samuel, I was never angry at you, she said. Her voice calm but emotions swirled beneath the surface, churning like a tempestuous sea. Even when I left, I already knew there was no future for us. Not the kind of future I wanted. I never hated you, Samuel, because when I loved you, I understood who you were. I knew your limitations, your fears, your inability to commit. She paused, holding his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I needed to love our son enough for the both of us. He deserved more than I could give him while I was still clinging to a dream that would never come true. Her words struck Samuel like a knife, piercing through his carefully constructed defenses, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. He had never felt so small, so inadequate. He had everything the world could offer: money, power, success. Yet, he had lost the two most important people in his life, the two souls who had the power to make him whole. Samuel took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. I was wrong, he admitted, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. I was a fool to let you go. I was blinded by my own fears, my own insecurities. He paused, his voice cracking with emotion. But Amelia, I can't change the past. I can only do everything in my power to make things right now. He stepped closer, his eyes unwavering, pleading with her to see the sincerity in his heart. Give me a chance, Amelia. Not out of obligation, not out of responsibility, but because I truly want to learn how to love you, how to be a father, how to be a better man. Amelia looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching his eyes, trying to discern his true intentions. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability in his expression. She knew Samuel was not the kind of man who admitted his mistakes easily, let alone stood before someone asking for a chance. But tonight, he had come to her, willing to break down his own walls, to confront his own demons. For the first time, he was choosing her, putting her needs and desires above his own. She didn't say anything, allowing the silence to stretch between them, amplifying the weight of the moment. Chapter 13. Love is not a promise. From that day on, Samuel was no longer just a distant presence in Oliver's life, a stranger lurking on the periphery. He spent more time with Oliver, carving out moments amidst his demanding schedule, patiently easing his way into the boy's world. At first, Oliver was hesitant, unsure of this new man who seemed so eager to please. He didn't immediately see Samuel as his father. Not yet. But Samuel never forced him, never pressured him to accept him. He simply showed up, consistently and reliably, demonstrating his commitment through his actions. He listened intently to every Spider-Man story Oliver told, memorizing the names of his favorite villains and the details of his most daring rescues. He learned how to play with him, building elaborate Lego castles and engaging in epic superhero battles, allowing Oliver to lead the way, to dictate the rules of the game. He took him to the zoo, pointing out the different animals and answering his endless stream of questions with unwavering patience. He took him to amusement parks, braving the roller coasters and the spinning teacups, enduring the dizzying heights and the stomach-churning drops with a smile on his face, simply because it made Oliver happy. He was doing things he never imagined himself doing before, stepping outside of his comfort zone and embracing the joy of fatherhood. Slowly, gradually, Oliver began to accept him, to see him not as a stranger, but as someone who cared, someone who was there for him, someone who made him feel safe and loved. And so did Amelia. She couldn't deny it any longer, couldn't ignore the subtle shifts in Samuel's demeanor, the genuine warmth that had begun to radiate from him. Samuel had changed, transformed by the power of love and the responsibility of fatherhood. He was no longer the cold, distant man from 5 years ago, the man who had been so afraid of commitment. He had shed his armor, revealing a vulnerability she had never seen before. He made no grand promises, uttered no flowery words, refrained from declaring that he would become the perfect man. He simply acted, quietly and steadily, demonstrating his love through his actions, through the small, everyday gestures that spoke volumes. He made up for what had been lost, filling the void with his presence, his attention, his unwavering support. Samuel had never been good at expressing love with words, finding them inadequate to convey the depth of his emotions. But Amelia started to realize that his love was in the little things he did for her, the thoughtful gestures that showed he was paying attention, that he cared. One morning, Amelia's phone buzzed with a message from a colleague, a screenshot attached. "Samuel just posted a picture of you," the message read. She frowned, confused. Samuel had always been fiercely private, guarding his personal life with an almost obsessive zeal. He had never publicly acknowledged any relationship, had never allowed himself to be vulnerable in the public eye. Opening Instagram with a sense of trepidation, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. Samuel's profile picture had changed. The man who had spent years cultivating an image of ruthless efficiency was now using a photo of them, a candid shot from a recent picnic with Oliver. In the picture, she was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling with joy, and on his personal page, he had posted another picture. One of her walking hand in hand with Oliver through the park, her face radiant with love. The caption was simple, only 5 words, but they resonated with a power that shook her to her core. "The most important things to me." Her heart pounded in her chest, a wave of warmth spreading through her veins. Samuel Sinclair, the man who once viewed relationships as chains, who had spent years hiding behind his work, had now put her and Oliver at the center of his world, declaring his love for them to the entire world. Before, his office desk had only been filled with contracts, reports, and the ever-glowing computer screen, a testament to his unwavering dedication to his work. Now, there was a framed family photo of the 3 of them smiling at a park, captured in a moment of genuine joy, a constant reminder of the people who mattered most. And it wasn't just at his office. Another framed photo sat on the mantelpiece in his living room, a silent declaration of his commitment. Amelia couldn't deny what she was feeling anymore. She had tried to resist, to protect herself, to guard her heart against the possibility of further pain. But Samuel's actions had chipped away at her defenses, melting the ice around her heart and allowing the warmth of love to seep back in. One afternoon, Samuel took her to the Sinclair Group headquarters, the imposing skyscraper that housed his empire. She hesitated as they entered the building, feeling slightly uneasy amidst the polished marble and the hushed atmosphere of power. But Samuel simply smiled reassuringly, his touch a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions, and held her hand tighter, his silent presence telling her that she belonged, that she was safe. When they stepped into the conference room, filled with hundreds of senior executives, the atmosphere grew even more charged. But Samuel didn't falter. He stood tall, his gaze unwavering, and declared with unwavering confidence, "This is Amelia Hart, my woman." For a moment, the room fell silent, stunned by his unexpected announcement. Then, whispers broke out, a murmur of disbelief and speculation rippling through the crowd. No one could believe it. Samuel Sinclair, the Ice King of Wall Street, the man who had never publicly acknowledged any woman, had just introduced Amelia to the entire company, placing her at the center of his professional world. The media went wild, their phones buzzing with alerts and updates, their headlines screaming about the shocking revelation. "The Ice King has fallen in love," they proclaimed, dissecting every detail of Amelia's life, analyzing their relationship, and speculating about their future. Amelia turned to him in shock, her eyes wide with surprise. "Samuel, what are you doing?" He shrugged, completely unfazed by the chaos he had unleashed. "I just wanted everyone to know that you're the most important person to me." Samuel had never been the type to send sentimental messages, to express his feelings through digital means. He had always preferred action to words, considering text messages and emails to be impersonal and inadequate. But now, every day, Amelia's phone buzzed with small, thoughtful texts, messages that showed he was thinking of her, that he cared about her well-being. "Did you eat?" he would ask. "Are you tired today? What do you want for dinner? I'll cook for you." And every evening, when she returned home after a long day at work, there was always a bouquet of flowers on the table, waiting to greet her with their vibrant colors and sweet fragrance. Sometimes roses, classic and elegant, a symbol of his enduring love. Sometimes baby's breath, delicate and understated, a reminder of the simple joys in life. Sometimes small daisies, the ones she loved most, their cheerful faces brightening up the room. One day, unable to contain her curiosity any longer, she finally asked, "Why do you keep buying me flowers, Samuel? They're beautiful, but you don't have to." Samuel's response was simple, devoid of pretense or embellishment, but it spoke volumes. "Because I want you to always have something to smile about." Not only did he buy her flowers, but he started learning how to cook, determined to contribute to their domestic life. His skills weren't great, his culinary creations often resulting in burnt offerings and culinary mishaps. But every time he stepped into the kitchen, his apron slightly askew, his brow furrowed in concentration. The warmth in the air was undeniable, a testament to his willingness to try, to learn, to make her happy. They cooked together, laughing at their mistakes and celebrating their small victories. They washed dishes together, their hands brushing beneath the soapy water, a silent communication passing between them. Once, she teased him, "Samuel Sinclair washing dishes? I never thought I'd see the day." He simply shrugged and looked at her with gentle eyes, his voice filled with sincerity. "If it makes you happy, I'll do it every day." One evening, as the three of them walked through the park, enjoying the cool evening air and the sounds of children playing, Oliver suddenly reached out and held Samuel's hand, his small fingers wrapping around his own. Samuel froze, his breath catching in his throat, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time someone had held his hand, had reached out to him with such innocent affection. He gazed down at the tiny fingers wrapped around his own, a wave of emotion washing over him. Then, a small voice spoke, breaking the spell. "Dad?" The world seemed to stop, the sounds of the park fading into a distant hum. Amelia turned sharply to look at Oliver, equally surprised by the unexpected word. Oliver had never called him Dad before, had always addressed him as Samuel, or simply you. But today, the word slipped out so naturally, so effortlessly, as if it had been waiting to be spoken all along. Samuel couldn't describe what he felt in that moment, the overwhelming surge of emotion that threatened to engulf him. A warmth spread through his chest, stronger than any success he had ever achieved, more fulfilling than any wealth he had ever accumulated. For the first time in his life, he understood what family meant, what it felt like to be loved unconditionally. Tightening his hold on Oliver's small hand, he looked down at the boy, his voice coming out quietly, a little unsteady, but filled with a love he had never known he was capable of feeling. "Yeah, Dad's here." Amelia stood there watching them, her heart, the fear etched in her eyes, was undeniable. Samuel nodded, but a restless energy consumed him, preventing him from remaining still. He darted around the house, a whirlwind of frantic activity. He replaced the cool compresses on Oliver's forehead with fresh ones, meticulously checking his temperature every hour, his brow furrowed with worry. Driven by an all-consuming fear, he even summoned a doctor in the dead of night, desperate for reassurance. Sleep eluded him completely. He remained vigilantly by Oliver's bedside, his large hand enveloping the child's tiny one. His gaze, a mixture of profound worry and boundless love, was fixed on his son. Each time Oliver whimpered or his small face contorted in discomfort, Samuel's heart clenched with a pain he had never known before. Amelia observed everything, her heart swelling with emotion. She had once harbored deep-seated doubts, believing Samuel was incapable of truly embracing the role of a father. But now, witnessing his unwavering care for Oliver, his every action driven by instinct and profound love, she realized how profoundly Samuel had transformed. He was no longer the man who shied away from responsibility, the man who prioritized his own desires above all else. He loved their son, a love that resonated in every fiber of his being. By morning, the crisis had passed. Oliver's fever finally broke, the oppressive heat receding from his small body. His breathing became steady and even, a wave of relief washing over Amelia. She turned to Samuel, ready to express her gratitude, to tell him how deeply she appreciated his unwavering devotion. But the words caught in her throat, her breath hitched in her chest. He was still there, steadfastly gripping Oliver's hand, his eyes barely open, heavy with exhaustion and a lingering fear. He seemed afraid that if he relinquished his hold, even for a second, his son might slip away again. And in that moment, bathed in the soft morning light, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that the man before her was not the Samuel she had known 5 years ago. She stepped forward, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. Samuel opened his eyes, his gaze lingering on her face for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, in a voice deeper and more resonant than she had ever heard, a voice filled with unwavering certainty, he said, "I love you, Amelia, and I love our son." Amelia stood still, her heart pounding in her chest, a tremor running through her. It was the first time he had ever uttered those words, not out of obligation, not out of fear of losing her, but because they flowed from the very depths of his being, a genuine expression of his heart. A radiant smile blossomed on her face, silent tears of joy tracing paths down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. Chapter 15, Happily Ever After. 2 weeks later, on what seemed like an ordinary romantic evening, Samuel escorted Amelia to an elegant gala. He presented it as an event for his business partners, and she, unsuspecting, assumed it was just another work function, albeit a particularly lavish one. But the moment they stepped into the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel, a gasp escaped her lips. The entire hall was a breathtaking spectacle, adorned with thousands upon thousands of white roses, her absolute favorite. The soft, ethereal glow of the chandeliers cast a warm and inviting light, and the gentle melodies of a classical orchestra filled the air, creating an atmosphere of almost palpable magic. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed, and a single spotlight illuminated the center of the room. Before she could fully grasp what was happening, Samuel took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her veins, and led her into the center of the ballroom. Her mind raced, trying to decipher the meaning of this sudden shift. She barely had time to react before he gently released her hand and, with a grace that belied his usual stoicism, dropped to one knee. In his outstretched hand, nestled against the velvet lining of a small, exquisitely crafted box, lay a dazzling diamond ring, its facets catching the light and scattering rainbows across the room. The entire hall fell silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Samuel's deep voice, usually reserved and controlled, now resonated with raw emotion, his words echoing not just for her, but for everyone present to hear. "Amelia," he began, his gaze locking with hers. "I once had the chance to be happy, a chance I carelessly squandered. I was afraid of love, afraid of responsibility, afraid of vulnerability." His voice softened, a tremor of vulnerability creeping in. "But you," he continued, "you gave me the chance to learn what love truly means." His piercing blue eyes, usually guarded and distant, now held hers captive, filled with sincerity and unwavering devotion. "Thank you for standing by me, even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for showing me that family is not a chain, but the most precious gift in this life." He paused, taking a deep breath, his gaze never wavering from hers. "I lost you once, and the pain of that loss has haunted me every day since. I swear, I will never let that happen again. This time," he emphasized, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm not asking you to marry me out of duty, out of obligation, or out of some misguided sense of propriety. I'm asking because I truly, deeply, desperately want you and our son by my side. Forever. Amelia Hart, will you marry me?" Amelia froze, time seemingly suspended. She looked down at the man who knelt before her, the man who had once been so distant, so closed off, the man she once thought was incapable of true love. But now, witnessing the transformation that love had wrought within him, seeing the depth of his devotion reflected in his eyes, she knew that everything had changed. Without hesitation, a radiant smile illuminating her face, tears shimmering in her eyes, she whispered, "Yes." The entire hall erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. Samuel stood, sweeping her into his arms, lifting her off the ground in a whirlwind of overwhelming happiness. He spun her around, their laughter mingling with the joyous cries of the crowd. From across the room, Oliver clapped excitedly, his infectious laughter filling the air. He broke free from the arms of the nanny and ran toward them, his small arms wrapping around both of them in a tight embrace. And there they stood, a family finally whole, surrounded by a sea of roses and love. 1 month later, their wedding was held at an exquisite seaside resort, perched on a cliff overlooking the azure waters of the Pacific. The golden sunset painted the ocean in breathtaking shades of amber and gold, creating a scene of unparalleled beauty. It was no simple ceremony. Samuel Sinclair had meticulously planned a wedding fit for the extraordinary woman he loved. The media went wild, dubbing it the Ice King's meltdown, declaring that a billionaire who once feared marriage is now giving up everything for love. Over 1,000 guests attended, powerful figures from the worlds of finance, politics, and entertainment, all eager to witness this momentous occasion. But Samuel didn't care about any of them. His eyes were fixed solely on her. As Amelia stepped into view, dressed in a stunning white gown that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, the entire venue fell silent. Samuel stood at the altar, unable to tear his gaze away from her. As she walked toward him, her beauty radiating with every step, his heartbeat thundered in his chest. When he finally took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the presence of her unwavering love, he knew he had everything he had ever wanted, everything he had ever needed. The ceremony was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, surrounded by a profusion of flowers, the gentle strains of classical music, and the quiet whisper of ocean waves. When it was time for their vows, Samuel held her hands firmly, his deep voice carrying through the air with unwavering conviction. "Amelia," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I once believed I could live my whole life without love, that emotions were a weakness, and that vulnerability was a risk I couldn't afford to take. But then you came along and shattered everything I thought I knew. You showed me that love is not control, that family is not a cage, that happiness is not something to be feared. I once had the chance to be happy, but I was too blind, too foolish to cherish it. Thank you for teaching me how to love, for showing me what true happiness is." He paused, his eyes searching hers, filled with a love that transcended words. "From this day forward, and for the rest of my life, I vow to always stand by you and our son, to protect you, to cherish you, and to love you with everything I have." Amelia's voice trembled with emotion, but her gaze remained steady, her eyes locked with his, as she spoke. "Samuel," she said, her voice filled with a love that echoed his own. "I never needed a promise, a grand gesture, or a declaration of wealth. I only needed you, a husband, a father, and a partner in this life. And now I know I found him." They exchanged rings, symbols of their eternal commitment, and when the officiant announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Samuel pulled Amelia into a deep, passionate kiss. A kiss that sealed their fate and solidified their love for all eternity. The crowd erupted in cheers, their joy echoing across the seaside resort. From the nearby garden, Oliver's laughter rang out as he played with the other children, his happiness a testament to the love that surrounded him. Samuel glanced at his son, a surge of pride swelling in his chest, then back at Amelia, taking her hand and squeezing it gently. "I finally found what I spent my whole life running from," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Amelia tilted her head, smiling. "And what's that?" Samuel looked toward Oliver, then back at her, his eyes overflowing with love. "A real family." Under the golden sunset, surrounded by the soft melodies of the ocean and the gentle flutter of flower petals in the wind, Amelia leaned into the man she loved, the man who would become her husband, her partner, her soulmate. She knew that from this moment on, she would never walk alone again. They had found each other, and this was their forever. Thank you for following this heartfelt story from Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share the story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.